Introduction in 1775. The 13 colonies fought the British Empire to help the United States become their own empire after the British started to rule with no limits to power. There were many significant fights, ambushes, defeats, and victories, but in the end, they came victorious. After the war, the colonies, never wanting this to happen again, wrote the Declaration of Independence, an article to help them stay safe international and national-wise. This document or article made eventual laws to help people, helped create peace in the future, helped start protest, and made better versions of itself. Without the Declaration of Independence, it would be hard to make new laws and be protected. Background to really understand the making of the Declaration of Independence and how it affected the 13 colonies, we first must go back, specifically to 1600 to 1774. On 1600, the British Empire, Great Britain, took control over the 13 colonies. Basically, Britain controlled everything including trade. The first passed British Act was the Sugar Act, which controlled sugar trade or export out of the country. This was an issue because there was no representation in Parliament. Parliament is a certain type of government where there is a king or queen that is at the top of the house. In earlier times, Parliament kings or queens had absolutely no limit to what they could do in terms of anything, but now, their roles have no strong power at all. Anyway, they were mad because there was no representation in the laws they were making, which means they were not able to vote or help decide whether the law was passed or not. After that was the Townshend Acts, which initiated taxes on glass, lead, paint, and paper, the Quebec Act, which allowed French Catholics to obtain good jobs in the government, the Tea Act, which was a tea tax in American colonies, the Intolerable Acts, which was a series of 4 laws passed by British Parliament to punish the colony of Massachusetts Bay for the Boston Tea Party, the Declaratory Act, which meant the Parliament could make laws for all the colonies not matter what, the Quartering Acts, which let Great Britain soldiers stay in houses in America, and finally the Stamp Act, which forced colonists to pay a tax, represented by a stamp, on various forms of paper. After the Stamp Act, the Boston Massacre happened, which involved the King's soldiers to kill four pedestrians that lived in Boston during a riot. Thomas Paine, an author and a famous English politician, made a book called Common Sense, which talks about seeking independence from Britain. He showed it to people and they thought was crazy, but after, sided with him and is what inspired the army to have a war. So, 13 colonies had decided to go to war with Britain. There were many battles that were memorable, including the Lexington and Concord battle, where the British came and tried to storm the colonists, but they were already waiting, and about 300 to 400 colonists let loose on the British and they were forced to retreat. Another memorial battle was Bunker Hill, which was the first battle and was very bloody. The British in their own territory march up a hill to get the colonist, but are at a disadvantage, and the colonist at the top lay waste, but in vain they were destroyed and had to leave. Another memorial battle was, of course, Yorktown, also known as the Siege of Yorktown. This was probably the most famous one, because it was the battle that ended it all. The American colonists and some other nations entrapped a major British army on a peninsula in Yorktown, Virginia, forcing Britain to surrender and giving colonists freedom. There were over 230 battles, but all of them led to one point, and this was just the start of the Declaration of Independence. Event after the war had ended, the U.S., 13 colonies, went back to their homeland, and finally, they were an independent nation. After a year, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Roger Sherman, Benjamin Franklin, and Robert R. Livingston wrote the Declaration of Independence, and a total of 56 delegates of the Continental Congress approved it, and it was ratified. The Declaration of Independence talks about the colonist motivations to seek independence from Great Britain. The first thing the Declaration of Independence talks about is the famous paragraph called the Preamble. The Preamble says, "We, the people of the United States, to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." One of the things this document talks about is the three unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are the rights that cannot be violated, thus, why they are called that. In the Declaration body, it talks about the Committee Five: John Adams, Roger Sherman, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson. These people drafted and presented the full Congress about the Declaration of Independence and how it would help the United States on July 4, 1776. It also told the world, including Great Britain, that they were now an independent country. The final part of the Declaration of Independence claims how they are free from England and breaks all ties with England completely. We, therefore, the United States of America, affirms that the 13 colonies are free and independent states. After the Declaration of Independence was published, the colonies elected the first president, George Washington, which was on 1789. There were some disagreements about the Declaration itself. On the website Museum of the American Revolution, it tells us that there are people, revolutionaries, who had been under British rule, but after the Declaration of Independence was in place, they no longer felt the separate colonies, they felt unified. However, people, lobbyists, were very unhappy because they thought that the Continental Congress's actions were illegal and did not represent what most American colonists wanted to see. The former governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, also disagreed because of the theses word, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the unalienable rights, but he states that they weren't unalienable rights because so many enslaved people were deprived of them. On the website, it talks about the short-range and long-range effects of the Declaration of Independence. Some of the short/immediate effects that happened were the writing of the Articles of Confederation, which was the 13 colonies' first frame of government and was made on 1777. It was a very weak article, though. It was weak because it relied heavily on states of governments to maintain power, like armies, funding, regulated trade. They were basically useless. After that, the U.S. realized that the Article of Confederation was bad and they needed a stronger central government, which led to the Federalist Paper versus the Anti-Federalist Papers, which, because the Federalist was much better written, was decided as the new Articles of Confederation, aka the birth of the Constitution, March 4, 1789. On December 15, 1791, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, was ratified. There were 27 amendments in total, but some very significant amendments were the Bill of Rights, first 10, the 13th Amendment, which prohibited slavery, the 14th Amendment, which gave citizenship to people, 15th Amendment, which made voting legal, the 19th Amendment, which allowed women to have the same voting rights as men, and the 24th Amendment, which stopped poll tax. There are in total 27 amendments, but those were just some of the famous ones. Some long-term effects were the French Revolutionary War. After the Revolutionary War had ended and the Declaration of Independence had been ratified, on May 5, 1789, the French had had their own revolution. The ideas about equality and liberty inspired the French to fight for their independence too. It also inspired independence movements for the French. The United States also gained recognition by other nations, and the first one, believe it or not, was France. There are 34 in total, like NATO members: Japan, South Korea, Austria, which are the three Pacific allies, and the